Modern format is probably one of the most toolbox heavy formats that I've seen in Magic. Without so many tutors and so many options out there, it feels like word soup is really key in this format because you need your cards to do everything, especially with the whole block constructed feeling of the format when your decks power up and certain cards get power crept out. I mean, Lord knows when's the last time you've seen a Kitchen Finks registered in a Modern tournament? I don't know, let me know in the comment section down below. I get to thinking recently that when it comes to these toolboxes, I really am interested in where the design of colorless land destruction is going, because I think it's a really cool aspect to explore, especially one that I've came across recently against the colorless strategies with a sowing Mycospawn, I should say, that recently kind of pulled out and tutored a Tectonic Edge against me, a card that I haven't seen in a really long time. The last time I played against it was specifically against the red-green Ponza deck. It was a very niche option. They played like 2 of, and it was at a time where you couldn't really tutor up something like that. Again, it's not like crop rotation is legal in Modern. Maybe not yet. But aside from some of the legacy power creeping that could happen in the future, I think it's important to understand where these colorless options exist in different Modern decks, and then where we could potentially explore them further. I want to see more options other than Ghost Quarters, Field of Ruin, and Tectonic Edge. All 3 of these cards represent a different axis of play, a different cost to activation, and therefore a different result and a different way to manipulate them. And that's the key. You need to manipulate them. They don't just present the value they have at base value. They're not just wastelands. And I think that's important. Modern doesn't need wasteland printed into it. Modern doesn't need strip land, Lord knows. We need to protect our basics, but even that is something that I think is worth exploring as well. That's what I want to do in this video. Go over some of these colorless options, but also where they exist, how they're being abused, and where we can then infer that future options like this can also be introduced to be included in other strategies. And of course, not every strategy should be able to do everything, but you should be able to do so at a cost. Maybe you have some workarounds. You need a couple of cards to do the same effect. Like, yes, black and its enchantment removal has been a hot topic recently, but again, black is able to do anything at a cost. So maybe there's some life loss involved. Maybe it's a high cost. Again, every creature is able to, every color, I should say, is able to destroy creatures or get rid of them in some way, whereas white may favor exiling, green may favor fighting the creatures, black may be straight removal, red may be damage based, blah, blah, blah. The colorless aspect of land destruction is very key because blue will favor bouncing, red will straight up destroy, black doesn't necessarily interact with them. I mean, sinkhole is a thing, I guess, but white doesn't really do so either outside of wipes. So you're looking at like Armageddon, it's looking at like kind of bigger wipes. But then also when it comes to the colorless side of things, it's really interesting there as well, because you have to have a cost to it, because colorless cards inherently are some of the most powerful cards that exist out there. They can be played in any strategy. And so restrictions have been introduced to them to make sure the limitations exist so that you can't just put Mox Opal into any strategy. But we have like older Moxes that can be put into anything, but that's for the legacy and vintage formats and a little bit of Commander as well. But it's important to have restrictions. And when it comes to these restrictions, specifically in the Tron decks, I came across again the Sowing Mycosynth playing Tectonic Edge against me. And Tectonic Edge is a really interesting one because you tap, play a colorless, and thematically, and rightfully so, it destroys a non-basic land, but it pays 1, taps it, sacrifices to do so, but with the clause that your opponent needs to have 4 or more lands to them. Now, it's not 4 or more basics, it's not 4 or more non-basics, and you are able to target a non-basic, but I think that clause is important because you don't want to be on the play, and then somehow it's all not about skill, it's about who won the die roll, because then the player then plays the Tectonic Edge on 2, and then is able to get rid of the on-the-draw opponent's land after that, unless they played a basic. And we don't need people to be forced to play basics all the time. Look, at the end of the day, when a certain amount of cards enter the field and a certain amount of lands are played, you could probably make a good inference as to whether or not your opponent is playing Blood Moon. Or, you know, if you see a couple of fish come out, you know the Flood Moon is also coming out as well. So basics are already something that a lot of Eternal players are already kind of contending with. You have to be able to play around them. Back to basics and everything, like even in Legacy and Vintage, options like this have to be considered. But it's not just about playing out your basics. Your non-basics should be threatened. Your non-basics should be able to be destroyed by options like Tectonic Edge. But where Tectonic Edge sees power is in its curve. With Sowing Mycosynth, you have green and 3 for the base cost of the creature. You tutor up a land, it's a Sowing Mycosynth. You can pay 2 more, a colorless and a generic, to then destroy a non-basic land that an opponent controls. So then if you have Tron available to you, maybe you kind of filter into a green with one of them, You have 7 mana, you use 6 for the Sowing Mycosynth and the kicker cost, and then you use 1 for the Tech Edge and you've destroyed 2 lands. The curve of Tectonic Edge is really what is important here, especially with Eldrazi so far up in the metagame, and we have decks like Mardu up at the top. There are a lot of targets that you're going to have for something like Tech Edge, but it's specifically a tutor part in niche strategies in Tron, because the Tron decks, their land bases, let's be honest, are pretty tight. They play some on the Soul lands, they'll play some of the Tron lands, they'll play the Eldrazi lands. Like, there's a whole mix of options that you have in these strategies. So having that optionality of being able to tutor some of that is really powerful, but again, can be limiting, because you do have to get to a point where your opponent then has to think about, you know, if they're at like 3 lands, let's say your opponent kind of powers out the Mycosynth and your opponent's at 3 lands, they're going to sit there and look at that Tech Edge and realize the minute I play a land, that Tech Edge is online because I'm going to play my 4th land. I have to be really careful about what I'm tapping out for or how I'm using my lands from there. I mean, especially if the Song Mycosynth comes out, chances are something got destroyed anyway. So that's that Tech Edge is going to be sitting there like a little prison piece waiting to get you. But the 1 cost on that is also a good portion of that, because the clause on it of 4 more lands limits it enough. And when it comes to its comparison to Field of Ruin, I think the difference here is very important as well, because Field of Ruin also grabs non-basics, but there's an aspect of you getting the land back. Tectonic Edge pays 1, you sacrifice it and your opponent loses a land. It's kind of, you know, you're paying more of your resources, your opponent loses her resources. Field of Ruin gives you the land back at a cost, but the difference with Demolition Field is very important as well. Demolition Field is touted as kind of the fixed Field of Ruin, but when it comes to something like Field of Ruin and Demolition Field, specifically Demo Field doesn't force your opponent to search. It's to tap, sacrifice the Demo Field, destroy a non-basic land and opponent controls. You look for a basic and your opponent may look for a basic. The key difference here is Field of Ruin and Demolition Field could be used in Modern Mill, where Archive Trap is 0 if your opponent has searched their library, which is why Field of Ruin is more important, because it forces your opponent to search. They could choose not to get a land, of course, but they still got to shuffle, they got to act, they searched, right? And so they are forced to search, and the Archive Trap is powerful. Your general play pattern is on turn 3, you play the Field of Ruin, you Field of Ruin a land, that's 1 card in their yard, you Archive Trap them, that's 13 cards, that's 14 cards in total in the yard. If you play Crab on turn 1, you play another land, that's 3 cards milled, you play the Field of Ruin, that's 3 cards milled, that is 20 cards exactly to then play Visions of Beyond with the island that you Field of Ruin into. Whole lot of word soup that I just threw at you, but the curve works for Modern Mill. And that is again where that card is specifically being used, and where Demolition Field isn't. But also the key to Field of Ruin is in multiplayer play. The big difference here is that Field of Ruin allows each opponent to also look for a basic land. So it can actually be a group hug card. So outside of Modern, I really wanted to point this out, because Field of Ruin is in all of my EDH decks because it's a great politic tool. You can get rid of a land and then look at everyone and be like, y'all want to look for some basics, y'all want to ramp? Because if you look at your player 1 and you destroy the land of player 2, then player 3 and 4 also get a basic land. You create some favor, you create some goodwill. Play Field of Ruin in more of your EDH decks, I should say. Get rid of Demolition Field. That card sucks. I'll be honest. Very few use cases for a card like that, but it costs 2. And then we have the comparison of the activation cost of Tectonic Edge, which is 1. So where's the free cost? Well, it's been a card that's been around for a while, Ghost Quarter. Many of you have forgotten what Ghost Quarters is, because Death and Taxes is not commonly played in Modern right now. Death and Taxes just isn't a great strategy. I mean, look, Ren and 6, Fury, all these cards have served to get rid of the power of the X1. Dahlia, Garden of Thraben, namely. But when it comes to even Cat Jesus, a card like that is still powerful when it comes to, you know, the power of Ghost Quarters, because Leonid Arbiter has that ability to make your opponent pay 2 to search their library. It punishes fetch lands, it punishes tutors, but it also punishes the Ghost Quarters, which turns Ghost Quarters into an effective strip mine, because Ghost Quarters is strip mine if your opponent isn't able to search. It grabs non-basics and basics. It's the only colorless land destruction source in Modern at this cost for free that can get rid of basics. And that's where I think the downside is very important, because of course you lose a land, you destroy a land, but your opponent is able to tutor for a land and it comes in untapped. So you have to be very careful with what you're doing. Generally speaking, Ghost Quarter is probably getting some utility lands. Maybe you're trying to take your opponent off of a source that they may be sideboarded into. Maybe they have like 1 or 2 red sources out there for some sideboard red cards, and you bring that in. Field of Ruin can get rid of that red source and they're great from there. They probably don't have a red basic at that point if they're kind of splashing for it. And so that's where a card like this is really powerful, again, being manipulated with death and taxes and the power of what those cards present. I should also note that I did mention Fury and Renin 6. Of course, know that Orcish Bowmasters is the big primary reason why death and taxes isn't playable right now. Imagine killing the 3/1 flyers and the Thalia Guardian of Thrabins and all that with a simple orc and its bow. Those Bowmasters are some powerful creatures, right? And they keep getting, there's more and more everywhere. But each one of these options are being manipulated in a different way in specific strategies. And that is where I think the design of these cards have succeeded. It's important to note that these cards don't exist in many strategies alike. Yeah, sometimes the 4-color Omnat decks will play land destruction options like this. The optionality is important, but unless you're able to tutor for them, you have to play them in higher quantities. And if you're playing them in higher quantities, meaning you are going to draw them, you have to abuse them. Field of Ruins are important in mill to enable archive traps. The Ghost Quarters are important in the Death and Taxes, Martyr proc, black-white taxes, mono-white taxes, whatever, to use with Leonin Arbiter. And then also the one of Tectonic Edge or options like that exist in the Tron decks because the Sowing Mycosynths can tutor for them as well. So unless you're able to grab them and manipulate them, there's no value to them. And that's where I would like to see cards like this explored more. I wanted to use this video as a way to maybe open up people's ideas as to the ways that we could design lands like this so that they don't become analogs, but maybe different options for different strategies. Maybe you're able to destroy a non-basic if you control elemental. Maybe you're able to destroy a basic if you control a ball lightning. I'm just throwing out random things out there. There's ways to balance and design these cards that I think could be really interesting. Like, what if we had a colorless land that it was out there, you couldn't use it to pay for mana, but you had a singular activated cost on it that was 4, destroy a non-basic land. You didn't even need to tap or sacrifice it. You just played 4 as many times as you want to snipe out as many non-basics as you want. Would that be a busted Magic card? Maybe, probably. The Eldrazi decks would probably use them, especially if it was 3. You'd probably need to balance it a lot higher, maybe 5 or 6. But it could be an option for a colorless strategy to take advantage of in the late game to snipe out different pieces, because at the end of the day, not many decks are playing that many basics. Unless you're playing monocolored, you don't have a reason to do that unless you're playing around, again, the Blood Moon and the Flood Moon part. So let me know what you think in the comment section down below. What do you think about these options that exist in Modern that are specifically played in different strategies and manipulated as such? And is there design space for other options to exist outside of the Ghost Quarters, outside of the Field of Ruin, and outside of maybe something like Tectonic Edge? What are some of your favorite use cases for cards like this? Because I'd also love to hear that down below. Let me know in the comment section, leave a like on the video. And of course, if you want to see more constructed content and just constructed yapping, you got to subscribe to the channel.